What happens when America's most controversial freedom disappears overnight? For centuries, guns have shaped the nation's history, identity, and politics. They have driven fierce debates, inspired laws, and fueled clashes over freedom versus safety. But what if the nation takes the ultimate step and firearms vanish from American life entirely? On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we look at what would happen if the U.S. banned guns. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution has made America far more gun-friendly than most developed nations. And while Uncle Billy's Hunting Club hardly qualifies as a well-regulated militia, courts have generally ruled that the amendment protects individual gun ownership too. But that doesn't mean it's absolute. Gun control in the United States has been spotty, but it's never been non-existent. While bans on adult gun ownership are often challenged, with exceptions for those with criminal convictions, it's been far easier to restrict certain types of firearms. Automatic machine guns, typically weapons of war, have been banned from civilian use since 1986, with only previously owned models allowed to be transferred. In 1994, the federal assault weapons ban was passed, restricting civilian use of some semi-automatic weapons, but the law lasted only 10 years and was not renewed after it expired. The United States may not be the most dangerous country in the world, even compared to countries not involved in war, but it has earned a reputation for being especially prone to mass shootings. The most disturbing of these are school shootings, ranging from embittered students attacking their classmates to deranged gunmen targeting elementary schools. But large-scale shootings have also affected colleges, office buildings, nightclubs, and parades. While many of them are planned-out attacks, some with political motivations, many are just a spontaneous outburst of violence. And that has led to many people saying, enough! While mass shootings dominate the headlines, they represent only a small share of U.S. gun crime. In 2023, almost 47,000 people died from gun-related injuries. The vast majority of those are not crime-related, including self-inflicted wounds and accidental discharges. Others came from armed robberies or crimes of passion. And then there are fatal police encounters where armed individuals are shot by officers. The U.S. is not the only country that has mass shootings, but the ones in the other countries are far rarer and often take the form of planned terror attacks. By contrast, in the U.S., you can buy a gun at Walmart, and it shows in the stats on gun ownership. In Canada, it's estimated that there are 12.7 million guns in civilian hands. Not surprising for a country with a large hunting tradition. The U.S., by comparison, has 393 million guns, over 10 times as many. Even more surprising, France, with nearly twice Canada's population, has only 12.7 million firearms, while Germany has just 15.8 million. And getting rid of those guns isn't gonna be easy. How would the U.S. go about banning all guns? Well, the first step would be to change the Constitution. No biggie, right? This would take either a political tsunami that gave a progressive anti-gun movement political control, or a tragedy that was so extreme it flipped a lot of people over to the anti-gun side. And even then, there would be plenty of hurdles in front of the gun opponents. Amending the Constitution is very hard, requiring a two-thirds majority of both houses of Congress and three-fourths of the state legislatures to pass it. Alternatively, the Supreme Court could rule that the Second Amendment doesn't cover individual gun ownership. As the final authority on U.S. law, such a shift could happen if an anti-gun president appointed enough justices. But just because someone passes something doesn't mean it's over. Any change in gun laws is met with strong organized opposition from gun rights groups, most famously the powerful National Rifle Association. Since 1871, when it was founded as a rifle marksmanship training organization, it strongly advocated for gun rights and claims as many as 5 million members. They're backed by a powerful alliance of right-wing and libertarian media who treat any hint of gun restrictions with the urgency of an air raid siren. An actual gun ban would send them into overdrive, and it would quickly send tensions through the roof. With 393 million guns in the United States, there is simply no way to remove all those guns in any sort of orderly fashion, and certainly not through force. Most of those guns were purchased legally. Taking them would be an expropriation of private property. It would also likely require suspending other constitutional protections, most notably the right against unreasonable search and seizure. While the government might push for exceptions under extreme circumstances, it's more likely that the issue would be shelved quickly and other elements would be targeted. Gun ownership is the end point, and this kind of reform targets the very beginning. The stockpile of weapons in American hands is the largest obstacle to banning guns. The U.S. might not be able to solve that anytime soon. but they can stop any more from hitting the market. The first step would be to ban the further sale of firearms as part of this new law, which would immediately put hundreds of individual gun shop owners out of business. While this is a relatively small part of the U.S. economy, the opponents to the ban would no doubt spotlight the impact on people's livelihoods. As a result, the government might offer generous buyouts to soften the income loss and then cast itself as the good guy in the process. Independent gun shop owners tend to have a small but dedicated customer base, but a far larger number of guns are sold at massive chains. Sporting goods giants like Cabela's and Bass Pro Shops still sell hunting rifles, but for much of America, the most trusted firearm supplier is Walmart. These companies would all see a pillar of their business knocked out, but it's unlikely to put any of them out of business. It's possible they could negotiate compensation for their inventory, but it's more likely they'll just wind up passing their financial losses on to the customer. So that's the end of sales, but what about the source? The other major pillar of America's gun supply is its manufacturers. Companies like Smith & Wesson, Ruger, Glock, and Colt run massive firearms operations. Under any nationwide ban, that production would come to an abrupt halt. For companies that exclusively make guns and sell primarily to the U.S., this would be closing time. Many would see their stock plummet to zero as soon as the ban was passed. Some manufacturers, especially those that also make knives, household tools, or focus on overseas markets, could survive, but losing the U.S. market would be devastating for many, and it could push them into bankruptcy. And this could have global repercussions. Several major firearms companies, including Smith & Wesson and Ruger, are publicly traded, and that means the ban will have an immediate impact on the U.S. stock market and could see a bunch of traders lose their shirts. While the gun industry is a very small percentage of the economy, it's estimated the domestic gun and ammo market will generate $19.6 billion in revenue in 2025 alone. Zeroing that out will see stock prices dip, people joining the unemployment line, and many other ripple effects that would send people panicking. But for some, it could open doors. A sudden halt to gun manufacturing would leave countless factories vacant, ripe for purchase at below-average prices. Companies looking to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. might seize the chance. However, the assembly lines would have to be retrofitted, and there would be plenty of stock, particularly ammo, that would be sitting on the shelves with nowhere to go. It would mean heavy losses for anyone involved. But not everyone's gonna be disarmed. In an America without guns, it's likely that one group will still be packing, the police, both local and federal. While some nations don't routinely arm their police, it is highly unlikely the U.S. would take that risk during such an upheaval, especially with a massive stockpile of civilian-owned guns still untouched. Armed officers, especially with the FBI and ATF, which already handles federal firearms-related crimes, would probably be very busy. Because when you shut down a market, a black market emerges. One of the most important points of conflict during the early days of a gun ban would be the ports. The United States imports over 6 million guns each year from countries around the world. Many of them would likely be in transit when the ban was officially ratified. These shipments would either have to be turned back, which would cause conflicts with suppliers, or paid for and taken into federal government custody. But this would just be the start of keeping the ports secure. And this war would wind up looking a lot like another one. A key front in the war on drugs is at points of entry. Smuggling is big business, and many of the same networks would likely turn to gun trafficking as well. Although this might be harder to pull off. No one can swallow a baggie of rifles and then have it come out the other end. Criminal groups would likely begin hiding weapons caches inside illegal shipments. Gangs eager for any edge over their rivals would pay heavily to get their hands on smuggled firearms. But the bigger challenge lies with the guns already in civilian homes. Many belong to collectors, some owning thousands, each one with a name. But with an estimated 40% of U.S. households armed, resistance to surrendering them would be fierce. Enforcing a ban would become one of the most complex law enforcement operations in American history. Assault weapons will likely be the biggest priority for getting guns off the streets. These powerful semi-automatic weapons are capable of killing the largest number of people. They are commonly used in mass shootings, and the government would prioritize tracking them down. Since the vast majority of these guns were purchased legally, the government would likely start with a carrot rather than a stick, turning to the same time-honored method cities have long used to get firearms off the streets. So what do you like more, guns or money? Gun buyback programs have been one of the most effective ways to take guns out of circulation. They typically operate on two simple principles. First, you turn a gun in and you get a set amount of money. Second, there are no questions asked. The gun will not be investigated for ties to any other crimes. For a nationwide effort, the federal government would likely establish rifle turn-in stations and raise buyback prices, hoping to speed the process and persuade law-abiding owners to surrender their guns. This would only be part one, but it might set off one of the most dangerous conflicts in American history. The last time Americans took up arms against each other en masse was over the issue of slavery. This time it might be over arms. A gun ban would be among the most divisive issues in U.S. history, and up to this point the effort has been driven by the federal government. This brings us to the vast majority of U.S. guns, handguns kept for protection and hunting rifles used for sport. And those are the ones the people will be the least willing to give up, and neither will their states. As the federal government moves further down the list, it'll start coming up against stronger opposition. Early enforcement would concentrate on stemming the supply. But if there is to be any attempt at removing guns as a whole, it would involve a much larger law enforcement effort. Even in the event of enough political support for a gun ban, it's unlikely that all states would be on board. Red states would likely step up their opposition when federal agents start looking for guns in their territory. And it wouldn't be the first time the feds and state police have clashed over the law. Most famously, Southern governors used state authorities and their National Guard to prevent black children from attending all-white schools during desegregation. Presidents, including Dwight D. Eisenhower and Lyndon Johnson, deployed federal troops to ensure court rulings were carried out. But this would be a much larger and trickier operation, and one that would be more likely to result in violence. After all, it would take a massive police operation to track down individual gun owners and confiscate their guns. And let's not forget, they're armed. While most gun owners are law-abiding, there are some who simply would not be willing to give up their own private arsenal. The majority probably wouldn't get far if they tried to take a shot at the officers, but there are those heavy hitters who could essentially create an arsenal and hold out in a shootout. The federal government has unfortunately learned its lesson from crises like Waco and Ruby Ridge. Both incidents saw heavy casualties as the government tried to shut down survivalist compounds. And nothing turns the public against law enforcement initiatives faster than graphic images of citizens killed in the process of enforcing it. The sheer number of guns in the U.S. and the tension around the law makes a full gun confiscation highly unfeasible, if not impossible. But the government might be able to take out a lot of the gun supply by focusing on crime. Anytime someone's arrested, the government can likely justify a search. If someone's pulled over as part of a traffic stop, the vehicle would be searched for any concealed weapons. If a more serious crime warrants a search of the house, any guns within can be seized for possession of illegal materials. And this would cause a boon for one industry in particular. In the aftermath of this law being passed, there would likely be a surge in criminal prosecutions. Anyone caught with a gun in public or even in their car would face immediate charges. But those keeping firearms inside their homes present a far more complicated challenge. Most of these guns were purchased legally, and prosecuting owners could fall under the ban on ex post facto laws. With lawyers eager to defend such cases, it's unlikely the government could spare the resources to pursue them. But in other cases, it might just make the prosecutor's job a lot easier. Many gun crimes get hung up on the little details, with prosecutors chasing down witnesses and traces of ballistic evidence to match the gun to the owner. Now, simply proving that someone had a gun on them would be a crime in itself. This approach would make filing charges and securing convictions easier, providing the jury wasn't full of gun supporters. Much like prosecutors once nailed Al Capone on tax evasion, it would give them a valuable safety net for convictions. And this wouldn't just be a legal shift, it would be a massive cultural shift. A total ban on guns would affect more than the criminals and gun collectors. It would impact the fabric of the United States. A large number of gun owners own rifles for defense, not from other people but from nature. In rural areas, some worry about wild animals breaking into homes in search of food. One viral tweet captured this concern when a woman asked how she was supposed to defend her property from massive feral hogs. At first, people mocked her, until locals confirmed the pigs are indeed huge, aggressive, and dangerous. A total gun ban would leave no room for those exceptions. Hunting is deeply woven into America's culture. While sport hunting faces strong opposition, many rural families also rely on it for food, meaning a ban could create insecurity. More importantly, deer hunts help control populations. Though not aggressive, deer can spread disease, and without management, their numbers can quickly overwhelm ecosystems and infrastructure. Without hunters to pick up the slack, the government would have to figure out a solution, and that could mean conducting hunts with armed agents or using non-violent methods like contraceptives. Anti-hunting advocates might rejoice, but this might not be good for the animals. Wild game only makes up a small percentage of the American meat market, but it will still create a shortfall in some areas. This would mean new contracts and plants for factory farming, which has been shown to be pretty horrible in how it treats animal agriculture. But that won't be the first on people's minds. After all, Americans don't like it when burgers are expensive, and the impact of hunting bans on their pocketbook will quickly become a top issue in the media. But it won't just be the grocery store where it's seen, it'll be on the screen. Guns are a huge part of the American entertainment industry, and that's often led to them taking some blame for gun violence. But with guns now outlawed, what approach will Hollywood take? Fake and prop guns would likely remain legal, allowing the entertainment industry to keep rolling, but it could push movies further into fantasy, while hunters in the audience watching get misty-eyed, but they'll likely face a lot of pressure to set a good example and turn the page on the age of guns. And every screenwriter with a futuristic action movie with laser swords would see their fortunes rise. But in the end, this would all come down to one thing: how far is the government willing to go? If the government really wanted to eliminate guns, it would likely combine mandatory buybacks with penalties for noncompliance. There would also be harsh prosecutions for anyone caught breaking anti-gun laws, but this would lead to intense resistance, with potential localized uprisings and nullification from red state governments, and it's possible that there would be high casualty incidents as enforcement began, leading many people to ask if this was actually better than the status quo. But taking it easy could be even worse. If the government eased up on enforcement but shut down purchases and manufacturing, a black market would thrive. Gun gangs could rise much like cartels during the drug crisis, turning parts of America into territories ruled by heavily armed groups policing their own streets. In some areas, gun crime could actually become far worse than it is today. But do we have to go this far? A total gun ban is an extreme measure with little chance of passing, and the US is currently not in a high crime period. This is why many gun control advocates now push for more modest reforms, like stronger tracking of firearms and stricter enforcement of bans on those with violent histories. That could net a few of the most dangerous individuals before they commit high-profile criminal acts that get the issue back on the map. If the USA ever banned guns, people would look for other ways to arm themselves, and some of them are downright bizarre. Check out Weirdest Weapons in the World and see just how strange human ingenuity can get, or click on this video instead.